let me tell you a story that will haunt you long after the video ends. It starts on an ordinary night, in an ordinary neighborhood, until a soft knock at the door changes everything. If you stay with me till the end, I'll share a case from England that still keeps the locals of Cannock Chase awake at night. But first, let's begin with a warning. If you ever hear children's voices in the darkness, don't answer, because sometimes what's waiting outside is nothing close to human. I've heard a lot of scary stories in my life, but none have unsettled me quite like the tales of the black-eyed children. The first time I heard about them, I was just a teenager. I remember sitting around a dying campfire, my friends swapping urban legends. Someone whispered about kids with skin like cold wax and eyes as black as midnight. Kids who appeared at doors and car windows, always asking, begging to be let inside. I laughed it off that night, but as the years passed, I kept stumbling across accounts from people who claimed to have seen them. And their stories. They don't sound like legends. They sound like nightmares that bleed into real life. Let's start with one of the earliest and most famous encounters. It happened in 1996 in Abilene, Texas, a town with wide streets and late-night neon. Brian Bethel, a local journalist, had just parked his car outside a strip mall to pay a bill. He was filling out a check when he heard 2 taps on the driver's side window. He looked up and saw 2 boys, one maybe 12, the other a little younger. Their clothes were old-fashioned, too clean for kids who should have been playing outside. They asked if he could give them a ride to their mother's house to get money for the movie. Bethel said their voices felt wrong, flat, cold, and strangely persuasive. The older boy smiled, showing just a little too many teeth. Brian reached for the lock, almost ready to open the door when something made him stop. Then he saw it. Their eyes were wrong. Not just dark, completely black, lid to lid. No whites, no pupils, just pure, endless black. The older boy insisted, "We can't come in unless you invite us." Bethel's instincts screamed at him to get out of there. He jammed the car in reverse and sped off, his heart pounding, watching the 2 boys melt into the shadows behind him. Brian later wrote about the encounter. He thought people would call him crazy, but instead, his story triggered a flood of similar accounts from around the world. If you ever hear a knock at your door late at night, and you see a child or 2 standing outside, take a close look before you even think about unlocking that door. Black-eyed children are almost always described the same way. They appear between 6 and 16 years old, skin pale as milk, sometimes with a bluish or grey tinge, like they haven't seen sunlight in years. Dressed in outdated, sometimes oversized or tattered clothes. Their voices are strange, sometimes robotic and old beyond their years, sometimes just too persuasive, as if they're reading from a script. But their eyes, that's what no one ever forgets. Blacker than midnight, like staring into the void. Not just the iris, the whole eye. Many people describe feeling a wave of nausea or terror, like prey caught in the eyes of a predator the instant they make eye contact. I heard this story from a guy who lived in Portland, Oregon. It was the summer of 2009. He and his younger brother were up late, way past midnight, watching horror movies while their parents slept upstairs. Suddenly, there was a soft, insistent tapping at the window in the laundry room. He froze, but his little brother, half asleep, stumbled over and peeked through the glass. Standing outside was a girl, maybe 10 years old, dressed in an old, dirty dress. She didn't look up at first, just stood perfectly still in the shadows. Then she tilted her head, and the boys could see her face. Her mouth was too wide, her skin was too smooth, and eyes like bottomless pits. She started to whisper, "Let me in. Please let me in." Her voice was so calm, it was unnatural. The guy said he grabbed his brother's arm and yanked him back from the window. The girl pressed her palm flat against the glass. He remembers feeling an icy chill roll through the room, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The next morning, they found a perfect hand-shaped frost print on the window, even though it was the middle of summer. Another encounter was a lorry driver named Mick. He was driving home after a late-night run. It was foggy. In an empty stretch of rural Ireland, nothing but fields and mist. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing on the side of the road, a young girl in a pale dress, barefoot, her hair long and tangled. Thinking she was lost, he slowed down. As he stopped, the girl turned to face him. He saw the eyes immediately, black, unblinking, and cold. She stepped into the headlights and held out her hand, lips moving without a sound. Mick's mind went blank with terror. He floored the accelerator and didn't look back. He says he couldn't sleep for weeks. For months after that encounter, he'd wake up at night, convinced someone was standing at the end of his bed, watching him with eyes darker than the night. If there's one thing all these stories have in common, it's what happens when you try to shut the door. Another man from Texas described hearing a soft knock on his window one rainy night. He opened the door to find two boys, dripping wet, asking to come in and use the phone. He refused, but instead of leaving, the boys just stood there, repeating the same request, never blinking. When he tried to close the door, he found he could barely move, as if something invisible was holding him in place. Only when he looked away, breaking eye contact, was he able to slam the door shut and bolt it. Afterward, the man felt ill for days, as if a chill had settled in his bones. He started locking every door and window at dusk, never shaking the feeling that he was still being watched. Some people claim to have let the black-eyed children inside. Those stories are rare, and none of them end well. A woman in Vermont was home alone during a winter storm when she heard a faint knock. She opened the door to two children, a boy and a girl, shivering in the cold. They asked to use her phone. Despite her unease, she let them in and went to make them some hot chocolate. As she handed them the mugs, she noticed their eyes, black as night. Suddenly, her nose started bleeding. The children asked to use the bathroom. When her husband returned, he found her collapsed in the kitchen, blood on her shirt. She spent the next week in and out of the hospital with unexplained symptoms, and her husband later developed aggressive skin cancer. The children were never seen again, and every clock in the house had stopped at 3:33. The most terrifying thing about the black-eyed children isn't just their appearance. It's the feeling of dread that washes over you. People describe it as primal, like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into the abyss. Some survivors talk about hearing voices in their heads, urging them to invite the children in. Many who have encountered them say that the nightmares never stop. They dream of knocking sounds, children's laughter in the dark, and of black eyes staring through their windows. Paranormal experts debate whether the black-eyed children are ghosts, demons, or something else entirely, maybe even aliens, wearing the faces of children to lure us in. But everyone agrees on one thing: you must never invite them in. Because once they're inside, something in your life is forever changed. So why do so many people all over the world describe the same thing? Kids who never age, never blink, and never belong. Some say it's mass hysteria. Some say it's an ancient evil that's always known how to wear the perfect mask. But deep down, we know that there's nothing more terrifying than something that looks almost human, but isn't. Maybe these children are the ultimate predators, preying on our instinct to help the innocent, to open the door, to show kindness. And maybe that's why their stories haunt us. Because we know, if we're honest, that in that moment, any one of us could become their next victim. I promised I'd share a story from Cannock Chase that still gives me chills. A retired park ranger, David, was doing his usual rounds at dusk. He'd always loved the peace of the forest in the evening, the way the light filters through the trees. But this night, something was wrong. The birds were silent. The air felt heavy. He saw a figure standing on the path ahead. A little girl, white dress, hair matted and tangled. She turned and looked at him, eyes black as ink. He says he couldn't move. For a moment, he couldn't even breathe. The girl raised her hand and pointed straight at him. Suddenly, David felt a cold, then an invasive whisper in his mind, a voice that didn't sound like a girl, but it echoed inside his head. It said, "You can't run from me." He staggered backward, breaking eye contact, and sprinted all the way back to his truck. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the girl was gone. But for weeks afterward, he found small, muddy footprints on the porch of his house, even when it hadn't rained. David retired early and never went back to Cannock Chase at night. Another encounter in Cannock Chase in 2014, reports of a black-eyed child started to surface in local newspapers and paranormal blogs. Multiple witnesses, dozens actually, claim to have seen a little girl wandering the woodland paths, especially around dusk or just after sunset. One local woman, Charlotte, was out walking her dog on the edge of the forest. She heard a child's scream, high-pitched, coming from the trees. Thinking a child was in sound trouble, she ran towards the sound. She found a girl around 9 years old standing under a tree. The girl's dress was white and filthy, and her hair hung in thick, greasy clumps over her face. Charlotte called out, "Are you lost?" The girl slowly turned, revealing her face. Her eyes were jet black, rim to rim. Charlotte says she froze. The air went thick and heavy. The girl opened her mouth as if to scream again, but no sound came out. Then she just vanished, right in front of Charlotte's eyes. She ran home, terrified. She couldn't shake the memory for weeks, and her dog refused to go near that part of the woods ever again. Other locals told similar stories. A fisherman at the nearby reservoir spotted the black-eyed child at the water's edge, her reflection completely black. A cyclist saw her walking along a remote path, head down, never looking up, until he passed, and caught a glimpse of her face in his rearview mirror. Every single account ended the same way. Paralyzing dread, the sense of being watched, and eyes like a bottomless well. Some say the Cannock Chase black-eyed child is the spirit of a murdered girl. Others believe she's something older, an entity that wears the face of innocence, but feeds on fear. So, what should you do if you ever see the black-eyed children? Never open the door, never make eye contact, and above all, never ever invite them in, no matter how much they beg. If you survive the encounter, count yourself lucky, but be prepared for the nightmares to follow. If you've ever seen something you couldn't explain, a face at the window, a knock that chilled your blood, a child with eyes that weren't right, tell me your story in the comments. And if this story has kept you awake, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who'd never answer the door after dark. Remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that look just like us. And the next time you hear a knock, late at night, think carefully before you answer. Until next time, sleep well.